Hi guys, Michael here. So, I recently got a chance to see the new movie First Man, the biopic about Neil Armstrong. And I figured this week I'd go through it and give you guys my review of this fantastic movie. And dive into a little bit of analysis. So, that's what we're doing this week. Let's get to it. So first off, spoiler warning, I will be going through the details of this movie, the story, and a bunch of other things. So if you don't want that spoiled, go check it out in IMAX. I have to recommend IMAX. But go check out the film and then come back and watch this video. So jumping straight in, the movie focuses primarily on his career at NASA. The movie starts with him in an X-15, which, first off, I think is a very good call. The X-15 was the beginning of his career at NASA. And I think that's a very good place to start telling the story of Neil the astronaut. And the movie finishes shortly after Apollo 11. So the movie is, focusing on his life at NASA, which is great when you're telling the story of Neil the astronaut, but is a bit lacking when you're telling the story of Neil the person. I think it may have been interesting to see a little bit of his life growing up, like why did he choose this career at NASA? Why did he choose the life as a test pilot? Or alternatively, what was his life like after Apollo 11? I think those are things that would have been interesting to see. But at the same time, Neil was a very reserved person. I don't know how much is actually really known about his life growing up or after. His life at NASA is really what we know the most about him. So I think that might be why they chose to focus on that in this movie. But all in all, I think the way the story was told did a great job of telling the story of his career. It did also touch on more personal aspects of his life. Starting off with his daughter Karen, who died of cancer very, very early on in the movie, and at a very young age, which is tragic and affected Neil deeply, and has a effect throughout the whole movie. The movie also touches on how his career affected his relationship with his wife, and how it affected his relationship with his children. Which is a very interesting aspect that not really many people think about when they think about Neil Armstrong. They portrayed the characters in the movie very well. Ryan Gosling did a great job of portraying Neil as a very serious and quiet and reserved person, which by all accounts is the type of person Neil was. He was very quiet. He didn't like the attention. He didn't like the spotlight. He preferred to sit back and just do his job. He wasn't in it for the fame. The polar opposite there being everyone, when you think of the moon, you think of Neil and you think of Buzz. And Buzz in the movie was also portrayed, by all accounts, fairly accurately as being the type of guy who kinda spoke before he thought. He would say the first thing that came to his mind without really running it through a filter. And by some accounts, that's the type of person Buzz is. I've never met him, so I can't say that with absolute certainty. But I've heard accounts that he is somewhat hot-headed in some ways, or very much liking the attention. And that is something that was very, very focused on in the movie. So from that aspect, the movie is somewhat accurate in at least the characters. The movie is also really accurate in its historical aspect. They touched on the X-15, and a lot of the things in that opening X-15 scene that you might think, oh, that was overly dramatic, or that's not unrealistic, actually were. That opening X-15 flight, he did bounce off the atmosphere and balloon up. He did nearly hit a few trees on the way into landing. He did land on a Salt Lake bed. It's just more or less the middle of nowhere. So that was actually very accurate. I walked into the movie and saw that scene. I'm like, was that right? And I did some research, and it was, which shocked me. I was not expecting that level of attention in the first 10 minutes of the movie. Also, the portrayal of the events of just the whole program. They touched on Gemini 8, which was Neil's first flight into space, which also went into an uncontrolled roll and became an emergency, and they had to disengage, despin, and abort the mission. They portrayed that very accurately. It was a very rapid roll. It was, an extreme circumstance. And that wasn't played up any more than it already was. It was already a very urgent event. They did a good job of showing his relationships with other astronauts. They touched on certain aspects of the astronaut program that many members of the public today really don't know about, such as the death of two of the astronauts, not in a space mission, but flying a T-38 jet into an airport in heavy fog. They flew into the side of a hangar. One of those astronauts being Elliot C., who Neil was very close with. And that's probably why they brought it up in the movie. But that's something that history somewhat skips over. And the movie didn't. So I was very happy with that. The moment they introduced the character, I knew, oh, this is Elliot, the pilot who flew into the side of a hangar. In very poor weather, I should say. But they touched on those small details, like Apollo 1, the first Apollo mission that ended in a fire and killed the three astronauts on board, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. They got that down to the exact words. The astronauts in the movie say the words, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between two or three buildings?" And that, you can go back and listen to some audio clips from the actual mission. They said that, word for word. They joked, they had communication problems before the fire. And one of the astronauts had, joked, how are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between two or three buildings? And they say that word for word in the movie. And the dialogue they use when the fire breaks out, again, perfectly matches what the audio transcripts of the fire have. Also, they paid attention to the fact that the fire didn't last a while. It wasn't like, oh, there's a fire. Oh, there's a fire, and it just slowly progresses. No, the fire lit, the whole place was engulfed, and within a matter of seconds, the capsule burst, and everyone was dead. And probably 15 to 20 seconds of the first notice of the fire. And it's very quick in the movie, and that is perfectly accurate of real life. It was a very rapid fire. It killed the astronauts very, very quickly. And the capsule did burst in real life. Another historical event in the movie that was portrayed very well was the landing itself. The movie, they land with almost no fuel left. They're, coming in, and there's a bunch of alarms going off for the capsule, and Neil looks out the window, there's a bunch of boulders, and he has to fly around and land somewhere else, and by doing that he has, almost no fuel left. That's exactly how it played out in real life. The computer was throwing out multiple radar warnings, 1201, 1202 alarms, and even the dialogue back and forth between them and Mission Control is accurate. Calling out 1201 and them calling back, "We're go on that alarm," or saying, "We're go, same type." Those are the exact words that Mission Control said back to them. So you could tell they went through the transcripts of these flights and made sure that they said the right things to each other. And in Viewpoints, they actually use the actual audio. Also, the after he lands, he says, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. And they call back saying, Roger, Tranquility, we copy you're on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot. That is one of my favorite lines from Apollo 11. And they kept it in the movie because that is exactly how it played out. They landed with 17 seconds of fuel remaining in the actual mission, which in the movie translates to a 2% fuel load, which is very, very close to having to abort, which is why everyone in real life was about to turn blue. And coincidentally, this really plays into drama in the movie, which it's actually, the guys who made this movie got lucky that Neil's NASA career was very, very dramatic. It makes for a good movie, which is very convenient. They didn't have to play up the drama of these space missions. They were all very chaotic, very unpredictable, prone to problems. And once they're on the moon, they have very good attention to detail there as well. The number of how they deploy the different cameras, how they deploy the different experiments. As they're leaving the moon, you could see the other experiments trickled out on the surface of the moon. And those are tiny details that you could have left out the movie and nobody would have cared. But people like me notice them and say, hey, they got that right. That's awesome. You could tell these guys paid attention to the details when they made this movie. They didn't miss a single technical detail. The details of the spacecraft are so on point. You can tell watching the movie that they paid attention to detail because it's not CGI. It's not CGI anywhere. It's practical effects. I went back and researched this. They built the capsules to full scale. They built the Saturn V 16 feet tall. They didn't use CGI. Instead, they built the actual models. They used practical effects, which I love, love, love to see in movies. It makes the movie so much more real. And watching the movie, I was literally sitting there saying, where do these guys have their time machine? Because this footage looks like you took a camera and went back to 1969 and filmed all this. Specifically, the scene where the Saturn V is rolling out of the VAB, I feel like I'm there, standing in the VAB, looking up at the damn thing. It doesn't feel like it's been reproduced. It feels like you literally grabbed me, threw me back 50 years, and put me there. This scene is filmed in Neil's home. The whole place has that atmosphere of 1960s. The whole movie feels so authentic. There's the craniness in the film. The movie is not crystal clear and crisp the whole way through. The scenes on the moon are, and that's beautiful. You step out onto the moon, it's utterly silent, and the camera pans around, and you feel like you're on the surface of the moon. They just did an amazing job there. But then you go back to the scenes in NASA, in Neil's home, and there's that little bit of graininess that you get from film from the 1960s. It felt like you were there. It gave it that sense of timeliness. And I feel like that added so much to the movie. Going back to the spacecraft, they got the details right. I mean, the scene sitting in the spacecraft, you look around, or the camera pans around, and you think, I'm going to space in this bucket of junk? It's like, and arguably the spacecraft kinda were. I mean, essentially, we put our astronauts in a tin can and launched them into space. And looking at the movie, you feel exactly that. There's a scene where they're putting the astronauts into the capsule, and they're like, guys, we got a problem with this seat buckle here. Anyone got a Swiss Army knife? And one of the astronauts turns around and is like, a Swiss Army knife? What the heck is going on here? And that's, by many accounts, exactly what it was like during, those old days. There was the old joke of, we're on a vehicle with however many kilotons of fuel, with however million moving parts, and the whole thing was built by the guy who said you could build it the cheapest, built by the lowest bidder, they used to say. And that captures how ridiculous the entire space program was. And on the other side of it, how brave the astronauts were for sitting on top of these things. But the one thing I did notice that I'm not sure I was too happy with was the amount of shaking the camera did during the launch scenes. By all accounts, rocket launches are not a smooth ride into space. You feel like you're getting shaken halfway into next week. By all accounts from astronauts. Unfortunately, I have not had the pleasure of going to space yet, but I've heard that's exactly what it's like. I don't know if the shaking the cameras did in the movie was quite accurate, but I think it got the point across that it's, not a Sunday drive. Also, the sound of the launch scene, I was actually pretty happy with. When the engines start up in one of the scenes, it sounds like a bomb went off, and it just doesn't go away. And that's essentially what a rocket launch is. It sounds like the vehicle is ripping itself apart, because in some places it actually is. They had that attention to detail. And I know I keep saying this, but that's because of the amount of detail they put into this movie. The sounds were actually donated, or not donated, but United Launch Alliance, one of the launch providers here in Florida, recorded or took some of the audio they've recorded of their launches and gave it to the movie to be used, which gives the movie another piece of authenticity. The launch scenes from Apollo 11, you could tell they used some of the actual engineering footage. There are so many moments in the entire movie that when I was watching, I'm like, wow, they put in the time and effort to get this right. And that's honestly my biggest takeaway from this movie, is how much detail they put into it technically. In terms of historical accuracy, I touched on this earlier, they got a lot of the history right. But in Neil's personal life, it, from what I've read, was accurate, but I don't know. And I'm just going to straight up say this, I don't know anything about Neil's personal life. They could have, made up half of it and I wouldn't have known. I don't think that's what they did, and because somebody probably would have called him out for it. But from my perspective, they got everything right from a historical and technical aspect. I mean, like I said, I felt like I was there in 1969 with them. I felt like I was standing on the moon next to Neil Armstrong. The whole movie was beautiful in that aspect. And like I said, the graininess of the film made it feel like I was standing in Neil's home in the mid-1960s. But in terms of the events and the amount of argument that went on between him and his wife, I don't know how accurate that is. I wasn't there. But the whole movie just has a sense of accuracy and realism that I really appreciated. So, in summary, this is a really good movie. The story arc really tells the story of Neil Armstrong, the astronaut. It touched on all the critical events of his NASA career, his X-15 flights, his Apollo or Gemini 8 mission that spun wildly out of control, his near death on the lunar landing training vehicle, which is a rough ride if I've ever seen one. The Apollo 1 fire and his flight to the moon on Apollo 11 were all right. Like, very right from a technical aspect. Historically, they were on point. The visuals of the whole movie, I felt like I was there. It was breathtaking. The scenes on the moon, you felt like you were there. When they're rolling out the Saturn V, you feel like you're standing next to this beast of a rocket. There's a scene when they're, going up in the elevator, and you feel like you're there. The movie, from a visual perspective, was beautiful, and it was technically accurate. So comparing this to other space movies, it's definitely below The Martian, because in my opinion, The Martian is the best movie ever made. The Martian is, dead on in terms of having an amazing story and having an amazing amount of technical detail. So, The Martian is at the top there, on all accounts. In terms of technicality, I'd have to compare it with Apollo 13, because that's the only other space movie that's really worthy of being compared to. Apollo 13 is a better movie than First Man when it comes to the story. When it comes to technical detail and technical accuracy, I'd have to put First Man up top. Because First Man had much better visuals, and they got everything dead on. They didn't have to play anything up for the drama. It was already a really tense, series of events. So I'd have to put it honestly below Apollo 13, though, because Apollo 13 just has a better story. But don't get me wrong, on all accounts, it's definitely better than Gravity. Because, I'm sorry, I do not like Gravity. It is not a very good movie. That's my personal opinion. But, yeah, below Apollo 13 and The Martian, but still a very good movie that I would very much recommend seeing, especially in IMAX. I saw it twice now, both times in IMAX, and it took my breath away both times. So, if you saw First Man, please drop in the comments below, what did you think of the movie? I'm really curious to see how your opinions compare to mine. I think we can have a really cool discussion down below in the comments. So, with that, I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please share it with your friends if you think they will enjoy it as well. And please subscribe to this channel to see more videos like this. I have many more planned. So with that, I want to thank you again for watching this video. And please come back next week to see more of my many, many shenanigans. My name is Michael. I'll see you then.